We actually received a copy of the 1994 Kayfabe Commentaries DVD with Eric Bischoff, where they would specifically talk about 1994. And, of course, 1994 was a period where WCW had some troubles. They were trying to break away from that Southern wrestling reputation and trying to attract more advertisers. And we of course, earlier this year, we talked to Eric Bischoff himself, and we did the interview when Frank and I were done, and we were kind of analyzing our thoughts on it. One thing we kept alluding to is that he had very selective memory, or he just didn't remember things. And when I watched this DVD that I received from Sean Oliver over at KayfabeCommentaries.com, which I definitely appreciate, I definitely enjoyed watching it, even though some things really made me scratch my head. But just his selective memory, or he just can't seem to recall specific times, what was going through his mind at a certain time, or what was the thoughts going into this particular pay-per-view, or signing this talent, or reaching out to this guy. When I watched that DVD, that was the first thing I took in when I was making some notes, was memory doesn't remember a lot of things about that particular time frame. And it's sad, too, Frank, because he was the guy in charge. And if you're going to ask anybody about WCW, you obviously want to talk to Eric Bischoff. He was the guy in charge of turning WCW's fortune around, taking it away from the NWA roots, making a profit, getting away from Southern wrestling, launching Nitro, the birth of NWO, etc. But when you analyze a lot of things he says, he just can't remember a lot of the stuff that happened in his life.
That's very unfortunate, because if you want to hear anything about WCW, I would think he would be the guy to go to as it relates to that. And yeah, it sucks that Bischoff can't remember a lot of the, big details and strategic details that went into, what Steve just mentioned here, as far as, taking WCW from the Southern wrestling to, the fray of sports entertainment, taking it to the heights that he did. And on this particular timeline, 1994, Bischoff's memory is one of those of either convenience or he just really doesn't know. He just really doesn't remember. And I think that it's both of them at the same time, really. I think it's convenient amnesia at some points when things may have not been going the way you want them to, and then it's like, oh, I remember this. Like, you can tell you anything about Hogan, but anything else, he doesn't remember jack shit. And I think that's pretty telling. He remembers what he wants to remember.
Yeah, I think that was very telling about Hogan. Certainly, Hogan's his boy. He remembers a lot of details about Hogan, but a lot of the other areas he doesn't remember too much about. Hogan, he recalls that the first time he got contacted by Hogan was that Hogan contacted him or called him on the phone at 12 midnight, which Eric would say that he didn't like receiving phone calls late in the evening. He was down for the night. He was resting. His mind's not really on business, etc. So here's Hogan, first contact with WCW. He calls him at midnight. And I don't know why. I just found that very strange that, if I'm going to call somebody about doing business, I don't think my first contact is going to be at midnight. Now, maybe the circumstances are different because he's Hulk Hogan. It's WCW. Maybe WCW really needs Hogan more than Hogan needs WCW. I don't know what the situation was. But to me, Frank, the first business contact, I think I would wait for the morning. Why would Hulk Hogan call him up at midnight when, some people actually go to bed earlier than midnight? So I found that very strange.
Exactly. He remembers all of this stuff, remembers lots of details about Hogan's contract with WCW, but he doesn't remember the circumstances of why, he let Michael Hayes go. It's just little things like that.
Overall, some of the things that he said, just to kind of recap, and I don't want to give away the whole DVD. Obviously, you can check that out at KayfabeCommentaries.com if you want to check out the whole DVD, but certainly he did not like Missy Hyatt.
Right.
That's one thing that I wrote down. But he really liked Kevin Sullivan. I know some people said a lot of good things about Kevin Sullivan. Some people really didn't like him, but from Eric's perspective, he was an asset to the company and had a lot of creative ideas.
Yeah, I mean, he was known for booking heat. I've heard Bischoff say that. I've heard Kevin Nash say it. A lot of that stuff, a lot of people don't know, but a lot of that NWO stuff, Kevin Sullivan booked a lot of that stuff. So he was a tremendous asset to WCW, unless you were one of the radicals. But nonetheless, Bischoff put him over big in the DVD.
Yeah. And, of course, going back to Hogan, he was saying that, as far as Ed Leslie, Bruce the Barber Beefcake, his push was a lot at the hands of Hulk Hogan, was his call. And that's the problem when you give somebody, creative controls. They can decide who they want to work with. And unfortunately, even though he knew it wouldn't work with Ed Leslie as push as a main player in WCW, he went along with it, Frank, because he basically gave Hogan that power.
Exactly. And that was a debacle. Starrcade 94, that was just crazy. That was just trash. And that whole thing with Ed Leslie, Bischoff said, he knew it wasn't going to work, but Hogan had that creative control. And Bischoff also said something very interesting during that. He says that pretty much a lot of people, rag on him for the Hogan creative control. But what Bischoff said was a lot of people, at top level, like a Triple H or like a Steve Austin or a Rock or the Click, they all had creative control. I mean, I just recently watched the Click DVD, in which they're basically talking about how they went into a room with Vince McMahon and sat down with a roster sheet of everybody on the roster, and they dictated who they wanted to work with and who they didn't want to work with. So I think Bischoff is pretty much on the money with that whole creative control thing.
Another thing he brought up I thought was interesting. From his perspective, he didn't raid WWF. We hear about that all the time in the history. In fact, go back and watch the series on the Monday Night Wars on the network. Was Ted Turner opened up the checkbook and they were just raiding WWF talent. From his perspective, he basically said that he didn't sit around thinking about, who can I grab from Vince? Who can I grab from the WWF? That in the final analysis, looking back at a couple of talents, say Randy Savage came to him, and basically it was a no-brainer since Slim Jim was going to pay most of his contract. So, yeah, of course I'll take Randy Savage. And I can buy that one, Frank, to a certain degree, because we know at the end of WWF, Vince didn't want Randy Savage to wrestle anymore. He was going to a youth movement. Well, Randy Savage felt he had something left to give to the business in the ring, so that makes sense to me. But then he brought up Bobby the Brain Heenan, that he didn't go out of his way to get Bobby the Brain Heenan in WCW. I think I have to take the shovel out on that one, Frank, because as far as I can remember, Bobby Heenan basically was at home, and I believe WCW contacted him about coming to work for WCW.
Exactly. I mean, Bobby Heenan, if I remember correctly, had moved to Florida, and WCW was doing their TV tapings in Florida. I believe they were doing WCW Worldwide at Disney MGM, and they had him down there doing that. I mean, that's what I've heard from Bobby Heenan. When Heenan was doing interviews, he was talking about how they, being WCW, contacted him about coming to Atlanta. He didn't contact WCW, so I don't believe Bischoff on that one.
But I thought it was interesting as well. He talked about, moving the tapings, and that, at that time they would run these tapings that people would fall asleep. I thought that was interesting what he was talking about there. Yeah,
I mean, sitting in the crowd at WCW, maybe the first 4 or 5 rows had people, but the rest of it was empty. They had to turn the lights all the way down to hide the fact that nobody was there. And if you're looking at the WCW product back in the day, I can see why people were falling asleep. I mean, I've been watching some of those old Monday Night Raws lately on the network, and I'm falling asleep watching those. So I can only imagine how it was at WCW. And he also talked about Steve moving the product away from center stage and moved it to Disney, and how that benefited WCW. They fresh audience in there, every other hour. They can tape weeks and weeks of television and have it in the can, and didn't have to really deal with center stage. I think he felt that center stage was really a piece of crap building. That's pretty much what I got from it.
How do people not fall asleep watching WWE today?
Oh, trust me, I do all the time. That's why I really kind of don't want to watch it. I don't watch it. I only check out maybe the Divas matches, and that's pretty much it. And I'll check out the Johnson Open Challenge, but you cannot watch Raw without falling asleep.
Definitely. In fact, I take a little side note. I actually started watching Raw this week, Frank. I hadn't watched it in a few weeks, and I threw it on the Hulu because on mine, I get the 90-minute condensed version of the show, and here's Seth Rollins talking and dissing John Cena, and they have the little graphic of John Cena's face, and they have somebody's mouth talking for him, and cutting himself down and all this, and it was the same promo I've seen so many times on Raw, where the heel champion comes out, shoots a promo on the babyface challenger who he's going to face at the pay-per-view, not going to wrestle tonight. I'm taking the night off, and here out comes 3 challengers: Cesaro, Randy Orton, Kevin Owens, and then the heel authority figure comes out and says, let's put them all in the ring together. Frank, I could have wrote that opening particular promo in about 10 seconds.
Well, we all could have, Steve. I mean, we've been seeing the same damn thing for 20 years.
Yeah. Where's the innovative ideas of, I'm talking about WWE, aren't I? What am I talking about? We're in this, as you said, this PG boring era.
Right.
Is what we're going to get. But another thing I want to note on the Bischoff DVD, they actually asked him about the Hall of Fame, which I thought was interesting. The WCW Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I remember that.
He felt WCW was only really around for a short period of time because he didn't really want to include the NWA history because they were a separate company. So what is the point of having a Hall of Fame for WCW that's only been around for 7 years? And that kind of really made me think of what TNA, because wasn't about 7 years after TNA had run, they decided to have their own Hall of Fame. So in some ways, kind of a backhanded slam against TNA.
I think that it is a backhanded slam against TNA, and Bischoff really just did not want to be associated with the NWA for some reason. He just didn't want to have anything to do with that, and that's a lot of where him and Flair's issue started in WCW, was just the fact that Bischoff stated that Flair represented the old NWA, Crockett era of WCW, while Hall and Nash, represented the new things he was trying to do at WCW. So I can see it definitely right there. I mean, he felt the WCW Hall of Fame was just a waste of time.
I'm not sure he really understands the history of the NWA, and that may have been the reason he decided to go in a totally different direction.
That could be, but I don't really think he cared.
No. I mean, he was a wrestling fan. He came from the AWA in Minneapolis, which would have known Vern Gagne's promotion, but I don't really think, if you look back at Bischoff's run, that he really understood, was a big fan of the NWA, and so certainly when he gets to WCW and he's trying to distance himself from the Southern wrestling stuff, that he just says, let's just scrap it all.
Right, and that's pretty much what he did. I mean, it just to me, it just felt like he had no respect for it, and that's just how it comes across.
I guess it's really not much different than what ECW did, right?
Right, they had no respect for the NWA either. I mean, if you had respect for it, then the belt would never have been thrown down by Shane Douglas. It was done for shock value, but it was also, if you're any of the NWA guys, anybody who was on the board, it was a disrespectful act. And it's kind of like the same thing with TNA. Remember, TNA was NWA TNA, and then they got away from the NWA. Same thing. To me,
when Shane Douglas did it, NWA was dead.
Oh, NWA had been dead for 7 years at that point?
Yeah.
So yeah,
I mean, Bischoff had the last chance of trying to preserve NWA, and he just didn't want to do it. And I think part of it was he didn't understand the full roots of the history of the NWA.
Well, I think that's true. He didn't understand the full roots of the history of NWA, but also he felt that was just so passé. He's trying to attract, as he said, national advertisers to WCW, and NWA just wasn't doing it.
It was funny too. He actually was asked about independent contractor status.
Right.
And something we've talked about so many times on this podcast. He didn't really have an answer either, and I still to this day have no idea how they get away with that.
I don't either. And Bischoff, he was taking, practice in that when he was running WCW, and he don't even know.
So I guess in the final analysis, Frank, I've seen a lot of Kayfabe Commentaries, DVDs. We've been sent some over the years. I've had a long relationship with Sean Oliver at Kayfabe Commentaries. He's been advertising on Gerweck.net for years. A great guy. Interviewed him at Gerweck.net. In fact, we'd love to have him here on the GRP. Pick his brain about some of the great projects that he's done, the guest booker, the timelines, breaking kayfabe, the U-shoots, go back to the territories, etc. So if you want to check out some of those titles, go to kayfabecommentaries.com. But as far as this disc itself, Frank, I don't think either one of us would recommend it necessarily. But what are some of your favorite Kayfabe commentary titles?
Well, personally, I liked the U-shoot with the Honky Tonk Man. That one was funny. I mean, Sean Oliver really, when he came up with the idea for the U-shoot, I mean, he really changed the way that we saw the shoot interview. And I really enjoyed the U-shoot series. I think that the one he did with Teddy Long was good. I like the one he did with, like I said, Honky Tonk Man. I did not like the one he did with Jamie Dundee. I thought that was like, it was so uncomfortable watching it because Jamie Dundee was really high out of his mind on some real bad shit. So that one was not fun. It was not entertaining at all to watch that one. I also enjoyed Timeline 1997 with Jim Cornette. That one was good. And anything that he's done with New Jack, I really liked it.
I think the Jim Cornette one is the polar opposite because Jim Cornette has a great memory of what he did in this business, and I think he takes notes. So, to look back at basically Bischoff is trying to really pick his brain and remember things. Jim Cornette is the opposite, where he remembers everything.
Right, he has everything wrote down. I mean, he even in some of the scenes he has a booking, sheet there of what they were doing and what day and what this house drew and the ratings and all that. I mean, very, very detailed.
Yep. So, if you're interested in the Kayfabe Commentaries title, definitely check out KayfabeCommentaries.com for more information.